First of all, as I said, I'd like to inform you that the webinar is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel as well as on our website. My name is Eli Saltzman. I'm an Associate Research Professor of Israel Studies and the Director of the Gildenhorn Institute for Israel Studies at the University of Maryland. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you so much for coming. I'd like to thank my colleague, Avis Koyman and Srushti Suresh for all their assistance behind the scenes that make this and other webinars possible. I'd like to mention that our next special webinar titled The U.S. Presidential Elections in Israel will take place on Monday, November 11th at 12:30 p.m. Eastern. For more information and to register, please visit www.israelstudies.und.edu. Thank you so much for joining us today for this fascinating talk titled Women in the IDF, Insights from the Israel-Hamas War, featuring Professor Ayelet Harel, whom I'll introduce in a moment. But before that, let's frame the conversation today, with your permission, and say the following. The Israel-Hamas War had significant impact on gender roles within the Israel Defense Forces, IDF, and Israeli society writ large. Historically, the IDF has included both men and women in various combat and non-combat roles, but the ongoing conflict has intensified and increased the involvement of women in frontline operations and defense efforts. As the war escalated, women's contribution to combat units, support positions, and emergency response increased dramatically. This shift challenges traditional gender roles within the IDF, as well as within Israeli society as a whole, where combat roles have often been more associated with men, and we will talk about that today with Professor Harel. The war has also heightened the sense of shared national duty, emphasizing the contribution of women in both military and civilian capacities. As women assume more visible positions in national defense and community resilience, there is also a potential for a lasting transformation in societal perceptions of gender roles in Israel itself, redefining the notions of strength, sacrifice in leadership. And so it is my pleasure and honor to introduce today's speaker, Professor Ayelet Harel, who is a professor of political science in Ben-Gurion's University, Conflict Management and Resolution Program, and the Department of Politics and Government. She's also serving as the Vice Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences. Her research is located at the intersection of politics, conflict studies, and feminist international relations. She published extensively on these subjects, and her recent co-authored and award-winning book with Daphna Tekoa, Breaking the Binaries in Security Studies, was published by Oxford University Press. Her current research focuses on conflict and trauma, democracy in deeply divided societies, narratives of women in combat roles in militaries around the world, as well as agency among women in minority communities during intractable conflicts. She won several prizes for excellence in research and teaching, including the Association of Israel Studies Young Scholar Award and the Roth Prize for the Inspiring Professor, which is awesome. Professor Harel will speak for about 35 minutes or so, and then we will open the floor, quote unquote, for questions. So please feel free to type those in the designated Q&A box in the bottom of your screen. So without further ado, Professor Harel, the virtual floor is yours, my friend. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Eli, and thank you, Avis, for this invitation. I'm very excited to be here. I will share my presentation in a moment. Okay. So thank you so much for inviting me. I will perhaps begin with just a short, quick message that the situation here in Israel is far from being normal. War is being held in different front lines. About 50% of our faculty and students lost someone dear in this war, and 1/3 of our students are recruited to reserve forces. About 150 people are, 1,000 people are evacuated from their homes since they're under constant bombing. And still, more than 100 people are being hostage in tunnels in Gaza. So we're supposed to start our fall semester next week, and our hearts are broken. Our heart also goes to our neighbors in Gaza, that their lives are in constant danger and their leadership failed them. So I feel that for me to give a regular talk, I know that in the US, it's a routine and people are going to school and study and the university. And for us, it's still, we're being really overwhelmed with this war. But nevertheless, I'm very happy to present my research here. So actually, my work deals mainly with women in combat and women in the IDF and women in combat support roles positions. And as Professor Zaltzman just said, women in the military in Israel, actually Israel recruits women to the military from day one. So we can see women in a variety of roles in the military from 1948, even before, and we can see them also now. And what we can say is that Israel represents a unique case since military service for Israeli women became mandatory soon after the creation of the state in 1948. Now, conscription of women is compulsory, and they compose about 34% of the military personnel. Ultra-Orthodox and religious women are exempted from service, as well as Arab women and married women. They are nevertheless allowed to volunteer. Still, I have to say that Israel lags behind other countries when it comes to combat roles for women. Not all combat roles for women are open, but these roles are gradually opening for women in the IDF since the 1990s. Now, if we want to talk about the recent war, then you can see here in the picture, women are active participants at the recent war. And here you can see one of the 4 women pilots participated in the recent attack in Iran last week. She's a combat pilot. Now, in this war, women played an active role in the protection of civilians, in the security units of the villages, in the Israel police, the Israel Defense Force. They serve in the Air Force, the Navy, the Armed Corps, the Border Guard Corps, the rescue units as combat medics. And I can think of many, many more roles. And in the attack of October 7, female soldiers, policewomen, and members of the standby units of the villages near the borders were killed in large numbers. Many women in the southern villages, kibbutz, and in the Nova Party were sexually assaulted, raped, and killed. And for the first time in the country's history, many women, soldiers, and civilians alike were kidnapped and taken captive. So with that in mind, we need to also remember that the active participation and the bravery of women in these impossible situations should be mentioned in every discussion, and we will come back to that later. So I would like, before getting into the specific topic of women in war rooms and the IDF, I would like to present 2 theoretical dilemmas that we are facing when dealing with women in combat and women in combat support roles. The first, before entering the case of women in frontline war room, I would like to present a feminist dilemma. When entering an academic discussion, while I'm discussing my study of women activists for peace, the responses are usually of great interest and even enthusiasm. But when I'm discussing women in the IDF, women in combat roles, the reactions are not so much enthusiastic. And this is really interesting for me as a scholar. Okay, we need to decide, what do we study? What do we talk about? What do I present when I go to seminars? And I have to say that some researchers hold that the entry of women soldiers into combat roles challenges both hegemonic masculine norms and the very nature of masculinity and femininity. Others claim that women's participation in the military should be seen as an important pillar of gender equality, and yet others criticize the struggle for equal participation. And the critics of equal participation argue that this process often has negative side effects, including reinforcing militarism, encouraging militarizations of women's life, and even legitimizing the use of force. Now, irrespective to this academic debate, since women are, as a matter of fact, currently serving in a variety of combat roles and combat support positions in many countries around the globe and in Israel, my position is that there is much to be learned from this phenomena about the gendered element of military service and about power relations in general. So I want you, all of us, to be aware of this dilemma when I discuss this topic. An additional issue that I would like us to be aware is the inherent inequality in the military as a predominantly masculine organization. Now, I'll give you an example just to get into how it is to be a soldier in Israel. So I'll give you an example from a decade ago. Several months after Operation Protective Edge in 2014, Israeli operation in the Gaza Strip, 53 IDF combatants and combat support soldiers were awarded military decorations for exhibiting extraordinary bravery. From a gender perspective, the most noteworthy aspect of these awards was not the fact that only 4 of the 53 recipients were women, but rather the difference between the justification of the awards given to men and those of the awards to women. Men soldiers and veterans presenting were uniformly praised for being brave heroes, presenting full record of the soldiers' physical actions. Women combatants and veterans and combat support soldiers were repeatedly commended for not panicking. Okay? This is important to understand, and even for me, it was quite shocking. One of the women soldiers who have reportedly spotted armed terrorists trying to infiltrate the Israeli kibbutz was praised for her calm response and for immediately informing her commanders. Another woman was said to have identified 13 terrorists emerging from a tunnel, and similarly, guess what? She did not panic. Thus, with respect to the gender, the award ceremony reinforces existing norms. Praiseworthy men combat soldiers are those who manifest their strong and active nature through acts of bravery, while praiseworthy women combat soldiers are those who overcome their weak and hysterical nature by avoiding panic. You know, at the same time, they could have just said that they just performed in an excellent manner, that they were so brave and so professional and so fantastic. And they actually chose the wording quite in an odd way, let's say. So one might have expected that many years after the entry of women into the battlefield as combatants and combat support rules, some of the gender norms informing military could have come under considerable strain, but as it stands, there's still some work to do. So I wanted to keep in mind these 2 points regarding the issue of people are not so happy to see feminists studying women in the military, and also the fact that the actions of women and men are often judged differently. And this is very, very interesting. Now, I would like to move further, and I would like to move further to my research about women in war rooms. Now, when one thing of a war room, you know, one of the first associations that comes to our mind is from the US case, right? You know, when we think of a war room, this is the image. Here we can see the US leadership sitting in a secure room in Washington, D.C., watching the Bin Laden capture in 2011 by Special Forces soldiers operating in Pakistan far, far away. So a war room is actually a point of coordination for military activities. It can be located either in proximity to the battlefield or at a distance. And in my studies, I don't deal with such distance-safe command centers, but focus rather on war rooms that are located in proximity to the battlefield, on Israel's various borders in actual conflict zones. And we will focus today on war rooms at the Gaza front. So when I move further, let's see. So during my field work, I'll just say briefly that it was surprising to find that this aspect of war, women in war rooms, is understudied. Many studies are being written about the integration of women into the military. Many studies are being written about the use of new technologies in wars of today, drones and others, and some monitors and all kinds of technologies, but very few scholarly works have addressed women as soldiers' experiences in strategic war rooms near the battlefield. And here my study enters. So if you would like to look closely, this is the border between Israel and Gaza. And we can see marked in stars the war rooms that are being located approximately 800 meters or 1 kilometer from the border, is quite close. And not only that, these war rooms, in the Israeli case, are located in actual danger zones on the borders, while the enemy is a few hundred meters away, these war rooms are being run by women soldiers. Women in the IDF are commanding and managing war rooms through visuals, monitors that overview the entire front line. The women are responsible for protecting the border and report any unusual activity, and in any event that might endanger the soldiers or state security, they perform a series of actions that alert all the forces in this scene. Now, as a security studies scholar for more than a decade, I've been interviewing dozens of women soldiers in frontline war rooms in order to learn about their roles and to understand the interconnection between security and gender power relations. These war rooms are located both conceptually and physically on the border between the home front and the traditional battlefield, and I study how these women take part in managing wars. So I'll give you some examples of the narratives from these women. An interview that was held in 2018. In the war room, you see everything, says an operations sergeant. You see more than the soldiers in the field see. You see the whole picture. When the soldiers were in, they did not see terrorists coming toward them, but I saw. I had to tell them to step back. So this is really interesting. It makes us think of military protection. Who protects who? Is it merely combat soldiers protecting women and children as we are used to learn? Or is it something else? Is it a different kind of protection? Let us move to another example. Tamara, an operation officer, told me in 2019, there are those who are in the battlefield and there are those who are behind the scenes. I feel that I did things, but this was always on the backstage of war that is being conducted and managed behind the scenes. The operations surgeons are on the backstage of the war. The combatants are in front, but the combatants cannot function without us, the war rooms teams. If there is no backup and assistance from the war room, there will be chaos. You prioritize the incidents, you see what's happening, and then you prioritize the operations. And then you see that the high command infantry officers are often required to go through the war rooms on a weekly basis to hear from the lookouts and the operations sergeant what are the new developments in the field? Tell us what you know. Tell us what you see. Combatants of elite units are regularly going through the war rooms before operations and ask the women soldiers, take good care of us. So the whole issue of protection is being played very, very interesting. At the same time, these women are combat role, it's like in combat support roles, so they need protection because they're not combatants, but at the same time, they protect the forces on the ground and they protect the country and the whole front line. So when I listen to these soldiers, both narratives of pride, satisfaction, and appreciation from their commanders and peers were revealed, as well as narratives about frustration about others disregarding their opinions or abilities. Brainpower, speed, dedication, professionalism are all evident in their narrative. Now, I published a few articles on the topic, and I admit I thought I was done. And I moved on to my next research. But then October 7th happened. And sadly, what happened in October 7 was disastrous. What Israeli government failed to understand and the IDF high command did not see, Hamas leadership understood. They were aiming at the war rooms first. They managed to damage the valuable cameras and to burn and destroy one of the 5 war rooms on this front. As the war continues, more and more details are emerging about women, lookouts, and field observers, and women in frontline war rooms, all of whom serve as the country's eyes and ears. So I, with 2 partners, Roto Levi and Dafnat Koa, initiated the large-scale study about what happened that day. Initial findings suggest that prior to the current war, soldiers have warned against various threats from various locations within the military, and that some of their warnings have fallen on deaf ears. What surprises to learn is that the information that actually discussed by higher rank officers, but did not follow but a policy change or a better defense of this force, of this front. It's ridiculous. It's so heartbreaking, actually. Hearing this information of intensive training by Hamas and provoking without changing the policy towards the southern front has taken a terrible toll on all Israelis, and from them, the women in the war rooms in particular. Some have lost their lives, some are kidnapped, and the survivors are deeply traumatized. We now know that they had performed admirably and even contributed significantly to protecting the civilian population along the border with Gaza. Bravely, they managed to function until the very end. And we also would like to say a little bit about this whole connection between the decision-making by the political level and the military level. What the interviewee 48, a war room officer, told me. At the end of the day, in the military, in our area of responsibility, I'm in charge of observing the screens, identifying irregularities, and reporting them. What's done with the report? This is mostly out of our hands. I can try to influence, I can advise, I can express my opinion, I can push in a certain direction, but in the end of the day, the decision is not mine to take, nor is it in the hands of those working with me. I mean, not in the hands of the battalion or brigade commanders. Often, these decisions are also political. Now, the inability to correctly interpret the information sent from the war rooms to the higher military rank officers and policymakers exacted a heavy toll on all Israelis, and the need to highlight the contribution of the lookouts and the field observer and the other women soldiers in the frontline war rooms and to give them a voice, it's so important. And I think that in the present project that I'm still working on, another objective is to commemorate this soldiers' heritage. So it's also oral history and commemorative project that highly approximate to the actual event. And I think it's important to give a voice to the combat support soldiers, some of whom are no longer with us. And we hear the friends, we hear the families through the parents. and also through soldiers that have survived and others who served in the front and are willing to tell us what exactly happened that day and the days before. And I'll just show you that there's so many victims to these horrible battles in the Gaza war rooms. I conducted dozens of interviews with high-ranking officers, both men and women, with parents, with soldiers in these roles, to understand the exact failures and to make sure it will not happen again. And the story of these women that we see here would be central to the analysis of the military, political, and human failure of October 7. Here we see the victims of Nahal Oz. We see those who were killed. We see those who were kidnapped and are still there. And warnings that did arrive from various directions, including specifically the women soldiers in the frontline war rooms, was misinterpreted by the political and military authorities. And despite specific warnings of extraordinary military preparation in Gaza in the hours preceding the war, the readiness condition remained unchanged, apart from a very small force that was sent, and the human cost of these errors was in the hundreds. Obviously, lessons must be learned and to prevent this from ever happening again. And we also can say that 5 of these field observers, lookouts, are still there. The Hamas are acting as monsters in any way they can to hurt us and to weaken us. And 7 field observers were kidnapped. 1 was killed in captivity. 1 was released, and another 5 are still there. And the Israeli government, I'm afraid to say, is not doing enough efforts to bring them back to their families. Before summing up, we also have to emphasize that women were acting so bravely on October 7, trying to help each other, trying to save others. And women were riding tanks, commanding troops, combating terrorists, saving lives during and after the Hamas attack on October 7. And they demonstrated the proficiency and experience of brave female soldiers. Also, the field observers and lookouts that were not kidnapped and killed at that day remained functioning and saved many lives from the frontline war rooms while risking their own lives. Now, to sum up, I will just say with the introduction of Professor Salzman that women should play an important role in decision-making, and that the war and what women are doing there could lead to a change. We don't see this change in Israel. We must look closely at this picture at the left. Where are the women decision makers, one may ask? We can't find them here. We need many women, independent, smart, and strong, that will be an important part of decision making in Israel in order to make a better future for Israel and for the entire region. Women are significant participants in war by virtue of their assignments to strategic war rooms and in other roles. And the research is a testimony for those who were murdered, kidnapped, and those who will be in this position and in these roles in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Harel. This was very, very interesting. We got some questions from the audience, but as the moderator, I'll take advantage of my position and ask perhaps the first one, and perhaps push you a bit, because you mentioned the fact that some of these female soldiers before the war issued warnings about things happening across the fence, across the perimeter in Gaza itself. And it seems like some of the information that came out argued, or at least kind of suggested, that there was some misogyny, there was something anti-feminine there. They were women, and as a result, they don't understand, they don't know, and they were the reports were discredited or completely overlooked. Can you talk about that a bit more?
Okay, thank you. I have to admit that when I started this research, I was convinced that basically, and that was the narrative in the radio and the social media, they were not listening to the lookouts and to the field observer. They were not listening to them. And what I found was actually much more severe. What I found and what I heard with my two partners, that the information and the warnings that were issued were actually discussed. They were discussed by high-ranking officers. They were brought into the political arena and decision-making, and still they realized that Hamas is threatened, that Hamas is weak, and we are stronger. What I also learned is that these warnings came both from women and men, both in the frontline war rooms and the intelligence. So I'm not entirely convinced after doing this research, although that was my hunch and my instinct, that is entirely a gender issue. So this is very important. Now, I truly have to say that there is a gender element here, that often when these lookouts and field observers were achieving something really important, they initiated warnings that they find something, and then the combat forces went and took care of it, the credit used to go to the combat soldiers and not to the combat support soldiers, the lookouts. They said, oh my God, the women in the war rooms, good job. Combatants, good job. They didn't take the credit together. They pass on the credit to the combat soldiers that are mostly men. So I can't say that there's something about the gendered element here, but the warnings came from men that were operating balloon services and monitors from balloons, and they initiated warnings as well. And these warnings did not lead to any change in the policy. And also the intelligence, there were both men and women from their warnings. So I have to say that the conception here and the failure here was much more than the gender element. Thank you for this question.
Excellent. This is it's a very interesting conversation. Folks at the audience, please type your questions at the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. I'd like to hear from you. I think that Professor Harel will be delighted to engage. We had a couple of questions from the audience. How do you see, and it relates to some of the international reports that came out criticizing Israel of the way that it executes the war itself. ICC, ICJ, the UN, Human Rights Watch, and so on and so forth. How do you see women and gender roles fit into that? Is there going to be kind of a different standard for women serving? Will we see women in The Hague, for example, if you take it to the extreme alongside the logic of or the argument of some of these reports? Or how do you see the international humanitarian law side of it and gender? Thank you.
This is a very important question, and I think that we're not discussing it enough in Israel. I think that October 7 led to such a trauma that the retaliation was not planned in advance in order to reach an agreement, peace agreement. People that are ruling at the moment, the government, cannot or do not want to, let's say, I'm not sure if it's cannot or do not want to, initiate a picture in which we are moving into a situation that we are creating some sort of arrangement, not with Hamas, but with Palestinian forces in Gaza. And I think that the fact that the government, full with predominantly male leaders, and also a few women that are also only allowed to say what Bibi Netanyahu is allowing them to say. It's not really being feminist voices or women voices that are freely expressed. So when you ask me about the reaction of Israel, I think that the lack of women on the table of the decision making, there are not enough women there to say, listen, what's actually we're doing. Let's say now at this very moment, we're also fighting in Gaza. Nobody have a clue. What do you want to reach there? What is there to do? We cannot eliminate all the terrorists. We cannot eliminate all Hamas, but we can make sure that Hamas will be out of Gaza. We can do all kinds of arrangement. Nobody is doing that at the moment. When we look at the Lebanon front, is a different ball game, because there the IDF found tunnels and weapons that are much, much, much more severe than in the Gaza front. But now, when the leadership of Hamas is gone, so what is the purpose of all this? And I think that if women were in the table, women were asking the difficult questions. What is it that we're doing? Are we doing enough to prevent the citizens or the people in Gaza? I don't think that there is enough people in the decision-making table at the moment that are asking the same question. I'm not saying that all women are necessarily more leftist or more human rights prone, but I definitely think that they'll have different perspective to a long-term idea of what's happening here, what is the purpose of all this. So I hope I answered the question.
Alrighty, we'll get back to that. And once again, people in the audience, please feel free to type your question. There's one question anonymous, but I think it's a valid question. You said that the Israeli leadership is not doing enough to get the hostages back. I'm curious, what do you think they should be doing? More negotiating, for example, like the November 23 agreement, or more rescue operations like the one that freed Noah Argaman but killed hundreds of innocent Gazans? So what's the prescription? Please answer that, and we'll take it further, please.
Yeah. So I think that at the moment, we cannot reach a situation in which the hostages are being freed by military operation. It's just not feasible. And what will happen is that the hostages will get killed. And it happened before. And we need to reach an agreement with representatives of Hamas and representatives of other Arab countries that are willing to take part and to give a hand. And clearly, this is the case, that they need to halt the war in Gaza, and certainly they need to let the option of Israelis getting settled in Gaza out of the horizon, because extremist forces in the coalition at the moment are pushing into this direction. And since in Israel there's the parliamentary political environment, so Netanyahu and the Likud party, which is the biggest party, are dependent on all kinds of small extremist groups. And at the moment, if they want to stay in power, they need to listen to all these right-wing politicians that are pushing the direction that Israel will take control of Gaza. And this is a really, really, really bad idea. I would like to go back to the issue of the UN, because it reminded me something else. I think that when it comes to the UN and women and the gender issue, Israeli women were very much disappointed from all the international organizations, the UN and other partners that we thought we have, about the entire discussion of sexual assaults and brutal sexual assaults that were held. And I think that it caused women to take a step back from all these organizations that looked at kind of working in a Hippocratic way. So it's also make very problematic relations between Israeli women and the international organization. But I definitely think that if more women would be involved, then the war will go to a better place, and discussions about settlements and agreements will be faster.
Thank you so much. So we have a couple of additional questions, one of which is from our faculty here at the University of Maryland, Avital Kaufman, who asks, what is the role of women in fighting Hezbollah in Lebanon, a different front, and in other fronts of the war? And have female soldiers expressed any changes or improvements in how they are being regarded since October 7th? In other words, is there a case of lesson learned in terms of the way that women were approached, the way that they were treated?
Well, what I would like to say is that when we discuss intelligence, women are in high ranked and both very much involved in what are we preparing in the Hezbollah front and so on and so forth. But when we discuss the special units of the combat units acting actively in Lebanon, it mostly men. What I can also say, if we put aside the Air Force and the Naval, that we have also women in combat position there, it's predominantly male. But what I can say is that when they saw that women in tanks and women with heavy weapons are rescuing villages in the Otef area in the southern Israel. So some said immediately, oh, the question of women in combat roles is, it's not a question anymore. Nobody will doubt it. And 2 days afterwards, the military just issued a short movie in the social media presenting women praying and baking cookies. Now, it's perfectly fine to pray or to bake cookies, but women are doing so much more than that as paramedics, as leading tanks, as being in rescue troops, and in so many other roles that was insulting. And also, there are conservative forces in Israeli government that are pushing against any acknowledgement to the women. Now, the women themselves, they know what they own and they know what they did. So they're not going to let go so quickly. But still, you know what? Even in the decision-making level, in the high-ranked, in the military itself, you don't see that much women. You see in the political level, you don't see that much independent women, not independent men, because Netanyahu puts around him people that are saying only what they're allowed to say. And this is very bad in a democratic system, but this is how it goes in Israel at the moment. So, it's nuanced. You see that many more women are being active, are being proud of their abilities. They know what their abilities are, but are not in a decision-making position, not yet.
This is fascinating. Another question from the audience. The Israeli military have recently been accused of several high-profile rapes and sexual assaults. One of the Sdete Iman soldiers went on Israeli talk shows defending the IDF's, for example, right to rape Palestinians, according to these allegations, certainly. I'm curious how feminists in Israel have responded to these events, the breaking into the Sdete Iman and some of the things that happened there since the war had started, and whether there are calls to reform.
The government itself and Benjamin Netanyahu allow extremist forces to sit in its government. Members of the Knesset of extreme right-wing movement are now a part of Israeli government, and they themselves supported soldiers that sexually assaulted a prisoner. This is a felony. This should be condemned in any way, and they should have the highest punishment ever. This is disgusting, and this is like, if when this October 7 happened, everybody said, oh my God, the Hamas, they're monsters, what they're doing, and there are monsters. And then you see that there are monsters among us. And I'm not ashamed to say that. I'm ashamed that this is the fact, but this is like, they're monsters and they should be behind bars. And the feminist movement and the leftist movement are all in favor of them to be locked out. And also some of the parliament members in Israel should be also locked out. Because when speaking of the, the democracy in the Middle East and so on, so there have to be some standards. There have to be some standards. Right. This is a terrorist. Probably he did horrible, horrible things. But he's being locked up and he needs to go through a specific procedure and, get his own punishment, whether it's a life sentence or whatever. And that's it. This is how it goes in a democracy, the rule of law. And here we see people that took the law into their hands, and it cannot be happening here. Cannot. It should be condemned in any way possible.
Another question from the audience. Does the employment of women in the IDF bring any humane approach to dealing with women and children of Palestinian children of women in the IDF? Is the IDF also adopting, as a result of that, a less heavy-hand approach? So, for example, you can talk about not necessarily the October 7th campaign or thereafter, but certainly women in checkpoints. Is there a change? Because you alluded to the fact that women, perhaps if they are in positions of power, if they're part of the decision-making circle, they would have executed the war differently, or perhaps the strategic level, the strategic conversations about the kind of the day after, quote unquote, question. But do you see something on the ground when female soldiers are deployed?
Well, it is nuanced. And I think that there are not enough women in this position in order to study that. So I can give you an answer by my instincts, but it's not something that I've been conducting research on. So I can't really tell you about being more, with ethic of care and this and that, because it's like, it's wishful thinking. I wouldn't say that because I didn't check this out. I assume that women in general will act in a more responsible way and not through the ego, more through the mind, but also it's not necessarily the case that all women will be so empathic and passionate about bringing peace and love and all that. I'm not so sure about that. I'm not convinced this is the case. I would like to believe that, but I'm not sure. I can give you an example by previous research that I conducted with Shir Dafnat Koa, and we were interviewing combat soldiers and combat support soldiers. So when we interviewed the soldiers after they concluded the service, they used different voices to describe what they did. For example, when they talk about their abilities, they said, I was the best one for the job. I was the best one. I was brave. I did it great, and so on and so forth. When they discussed what's happening to the Palestinians, for example, they didn't talk with a first-person voice. They talk with a you voice, what we call as the you voice. When you lift your head, you see destruction. You see that their lives are being ruined, let's say. So it's not the exact quote, but you get what I say. So they were aware that something is not right. It's not quite right, but they were not freely discussing it as I was a part of this, I did this, I did that. But they said, like, you see, like someone else, like in a male voice, because in Israel there's a male and female voice. It was quite intriguing. I do believe that if women were in higher ranks, higher positions, they'll be more responsible, they'll see the picture more widely. I cannot guarantee that they will be much more empathic and so on. This is a bloody war.
Thank you so much. few more questions, a couple from our faculty. One is Max Grossman, the chair of the Jewish Studies program over here, and actually seats across the hallway from me now. Can you envision an approach to recruitment and training that might bring more women in the higher ranks, not necessarily under this government or this particular military leadership, perhaps in the future? And again, if I can kind of put it in context, the debate about women serving in senior positions in the IDF as well as in the political system has been ongoing for a long time. There's all kinds of civil society involved, Forum Voa, for example, and others who are trying to push forward. Do you see the war and the things that have happened in the past year plus contributing to that? Is the future brighter in the sense that is more inclusive, or is it not?
I think that we're heading that way in the military. There are many more women that in higher ranks, not that high, they were kind of blocked, but I think that since many women reach that position, it will move forward. And it will move forward, and when many women looking up at these women as commanders, they'll go further and further. And I think that there is a slight trend into getting women into higher rank positions. Also, that you see that in the Air Force, the pilots, and we see in the naval forces, we also have women in very, very high ranks. We also have in the Israeli Mossad, that we're not usually talking so much about, but women in a very, very special positions that we can't discuss at the moment. But women are doing extraordinary things. And when they conclude the military service with these ranks, what is interesting to see that people are waiting for them in the political system. We see now Orna Barbivai, for example, that she's in the position at the moment at Lapid's party. People were waiting for her. Which party would she choose? So she came from she was not a combat soldier, but nevertheless, people were waiting for her. Now, I have to say, I have two reservations. One, there are not enough women in these positions, but on the other hand, I'm not quite sure that all those generals are so good when they go to the political realm. They're used to a hierarchic system that they say something, everybody is obeying the orders, and then they go to the political system, it's like a zoo. Everybody's doing what they're doing. You need to feed, all the demands of all the I don't want to say animals, but yeah, this is how it goes. It's like, it's a chaos. In a political system, you need to be a little bit more complicated. So all these ex-generals was not that excellent in the political game. So we are hoping for better leadership in Israel, honest, and we're hoping for a leadership that is taking care of the people, that are looking for a better future, to looking at the living next to our neighbors, because this is the neighborhood we have. We don't have any other neighbors around us. And we need to figure out a way not to living on our swords all the time. Also, the reserve forces and the soldiers, they're tired. They want to go back to their families. It's like people are there for like more than a year fighting. They left their jobs, they left their university teaching, they left I don't know, it's like their careers. It's an unreasonable situation, and we need to find a way to stop that.
All righty. One more question from the audience. Have you done any comparative studies looking at other countries? Are there other countries that require mandatory service for women? Is this a kind of a unique case? Can we talk about other countries? Is there something that we can learn from their experience about their gender roles and how they change society as a whole?
I have to say, in the Nordic countries, there are some cases in which women are being drafted for 1 year, and some European countries. But I have to say, it's quite different. Why is it different? It is different because Israel, as opposed to these countries, have actual enemies on the borders, and being involved in a constant, armed conflicts every now and then. and that the fact that the military service is actually being a combatant, you actually use your ability as a combatant. And I'm not saying, let's say, if I would like to compare it to the US case, I actually wrote an article with a partner from Yale, Ilan Arpaz-Rotem, about women in the US military as opposed to the women in the Israeli military with regard to sexual assaults. And so in the US military, there are deployments for several months, and you go to fight in a place like far, far away from your country. So you feel that you're in a mission, but it's not that you're protecting your own family. You're not protecting your own borders. And in Israel, the situation is quite different in that sense that you can go and you serve 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours from your home. Missiles are being fired on your home, not in any other place in very far in distance, let's say other place, Afghanistan, Iraq, you have many, many examples in the involvement of the US military at the moment. We have US soldiers in Israel at the moment being here. So in that sense, it's quite different because the intensity of the service is a completely different level.
All righty. So the next question is a bit kind of perhaps off topic, but perhaps relates to it nevertheless. And it's pushing back against some of the terms that you use. Specifically, do you believe it is responsible, to refer to all those prisoners in Sde Teiman and other places as terrorists, quote unquote? How do you talk about, can you talk about the language that is used? And terminology matters, language matters. With regards to this question, certainly terrorists, how do you see that? If this is something you can address.
This is a wonderful question. It's fantastic, and it's also very important. I think that we have to realize that Hamas is a terror organization. So when we talk about the prisoners, I didn't check specifically, but if these people there were members of Hamas and they were committing crimes by Hamas, so they're certainly terrorists. It could be the case that Palestinians were there not involved with Hamas, then I would consider if to term them as terrorists or as Palestinians that happened to be there. I'm not sure if they just took Palestinians from their home and put them in jail. I'm not sure this is the case. I think that when they took people that they told them, okay, I killed this one and that one, and they have like a list of things that they do. I've been a member in this, and I was fighting and I was shooting and whatever. So we need to check this out, but I'm not a court. I mean, everything that is being discussed there should be, in maybe a military court, or a civilian court that should discuss the responsibility and the deeds and the doing of each one of them. And if there were members in Hamas, then certainly, yes, they're terrorists.
Thank you so much. So we're coming to the end of this webinar. So again, we talked about the kind of the past, present, and future. So just to conclude, and in a way, kind of to try to perhaps estimate or extrapolate or hypothesize, if you wish, given some of the lessons, some of the situations, some of the very tragic outcomes of October 7th and thereafter, will there be significant change that kind of spills over from the IDF, from the military service, onto Israeli society as a whole about the role of women in the IDF and perhaps others? And again, this is kind of a general way to ask, will there be more inclusion in that regard? Is it going to change? Perhaps there's going to be a kind of a backwards movement, so to speak. Again, you have a bunch of several women who are held captive. Some of the conditions are horrendous, as reported, not only physical, but also mental, sexual abuse, and so on and so forth. Will that make Israeli policymakers pause and say, this is something that we're not willing to endure, to cope with, and there's going to be kind of a backsliding of this issue?
Well, I think it depends on the ruling party and the ruling coalition, because we need to even think more than gender. You ask me about gender, I think what would happen in general, to think what led to October 7, who's responsible, what exactly happened, what are the failures. We need to conduct an investigation about this. And now, at the moment, the forces in the ruling coalition are not willing to conduct this investigation, even to learn what happened, who is responsible, because clearly people are responsible for mistakes that were, mistakes that were done, and even more severe than this. So when we discuss what will happen to women and to women's role, I am confident that one of the lessons that should be learned, that they should take the soldiers' opinion seriously. They should put them in a specific discussion. That will be a specific discussion, who brings to whom the information and what are we doing with that. But it is even more than that. I think that we are at the moment in a serious problem because no one is taking responsibility for the failure of October 7, and clearly it was a failure. And thousands of people were killed. And I think that this is quite depressing. I don't know if I want to end with this note, but I think that one should be aware that at the moment the government wants to hold itself. The extremist forces would like to conquer more lands and to settle in the West Bank and to settle in Gaza. And this is what they see and this is what they do. And they actually blackmailing Benjamin Netanyahu in a political manner because he wants to remain in power. So in order to be in power, he needs to give them what they want. So we are in this spiral of problems, of not actually checking what was wrong, not trying to fix anything. And when we're not fixing anything, we will leave women in the same status that they were before. We will leave the same problems as they were before. We still believe that we're the best, but we're probably not exactly the best. We should not underestimate any enemy ever again. And I think that lessons should be learned, and I think that the world in that sense could also assist us in that sense, both pushing into a deal and allowing this possibility to be discussed and trying to make an agreement and to lead to a place in which we're actually checking what happened, how can we fix it, and how can we think of a better future for our country.
Thank you so much, Professor Harel. I think that this is the right point to end in a positive and perhaps a kind of a thoughtful way of thinking about the future coming ahead, not only to Israelis and Palestinians, but perhaps for the entire region as well. Members of the audience, thank you so much for coming. We appreciate you. Please consider attending our future webinars. For more information and to register, www.israelstudies.umd.edu. Have a wonderful day. Take care, y'all.